Hi there. Today is Careers Q&A Day, where Zoe and I give you some personal attention.
Today's question comes in from Mark, who leads talent in a global organisation and asks us, what role does a career conversation play in succession planning and high potential talent retention? Such a good question, because succession planning often lives in the data, in the skills profiles and spreadsheets, whereas career conversations live in one-to-ones. And the two don't always talk to each other. So let's explore this and connect them together. So succession planning is usually about roles, whereas the career conversation is much more about people and the human side. And when those two things aren't aligned, I think that's when we start to see a few problems creeping into play. And you might have a sort of ready now list that nobody actually wants or has agreed to. So there's lots of assumptions that have been made. You might have high potentials who don't know that they're seen as such, for example. You might have the sort of forgotten folk who would be perfect, but nobody knows or has even asked them, and people on succession plans who don't even want the job that they're being lined up for, with those assumptions being made. So, this is where career conversations really do matter, because you can't plan succession for someone whose ambition you haven't really explored, because that's dangerous territory then. And people either fail at it, don't enjoy it, leave, and all those sorts of things come into play. And you can't retain high potential talent if you are guessing in terms of what matters most to them. So I think there's some sort of headlines to think about.
Yeah. A proper career conversation can help you in a wide variety of ways for, let's start with succession planning and hypos. The first is that it kind of tests the ambition. So, career conversation will get underneath and give you the factual answers to, do they actually want bigger scope? What does success actually mean to them right now? When they talk about ambition and success, are they necessarily talking about leadership? Or could they be talking about depth in terms of expertise? And if you're their manager, do they want your job, or are they gunning for something quite different? I think too much succession planning assumes that there is an upward ambition. In fact, too much succession planning just makes assumptions altogether. I know we worked with a fintech recently, and they were telling us that they invested huge amounts of time and energy in thinking about development opportunities for people, only to have these widely miss the mark because they hadn't asked them, do you actually want these opportunities, or are you in a position to travel, or, so you can expend a huge amount of energy and time and good intention on something that's utterly pointless unless you actually know what their ambitions are. So a good career conversation will replace the assumptions you're making with clarity and enable you to provide better opportunities and allocate your resources more intelligently based on data.
Yeah, and I think with what I also say is career conversations, whether it's succession planning or with high potentials, it will start to reveal gaps early. So if somebody is saying to you, yeah, I'd love that role one day, then from there you can explore things like, well, what experiences are you missing that's going to help you to get there? Or what exposure do they need so they're going to be ready for that role when it's available? What skills might need stretching? So rather than it being a sort of reactive process where we're trying to just build the blocks of succession planning, it comes much more developmental when we get into better dialogue around ambition versus where they are now and where those gaps are.
And isn't it the case as well that the more that you understand where somebody wants to go and you've taken the time to attend to that, the more actively they engage in the development that you offer, be it formal or informal. I was talking to a client recently about having the career equation be a precursor to taking any formal development within the organization, because it's just so helpful for everybody to understand what this person's direction of travel is and what the goals and plans might sit around that, and then to allocate or to explore or to apply for development inside, outside the organization, discretionary projects, everything. So I really do think that there's a really nice link that helps personalize a development agenda that can otherwise feel a little bit kind of generic and one size fits all. And it also increases their stickiness. When it comes to high potential talent, at least, they don't stay because you've given them the label of high potential. They already know that they're high potential. They stay because the environment that they're in supports that caliber, that they're being stretched, that they feel that people are helping them lean into their edges and grow as a person, as a leader, as a contributor. They stay because they see that there is a path that makes sense to them, that is personalized to them. And that, I don't mean a linear career path step by step, although some industries and environments do still operate that way, and that's fine. But a path that has meaning for them. And you can only devise that kind of career path by understanding what is it that people aspire to within their careers and how might they go about getting it within this context. And the benefit of having those conversations is that they feel seen. And when people feel seen and heard, they feel relationally invested. And when they're relationally invested, they're much less poachable by a stranger who is not necessarily relationally invested in it, who may not keep the promises that they make in order to secure you. So it's really about this deliberate form of investment in supporting someone to be the very best that they can be. A career conversation says very clearly, we are thinking about your future here, and that really counts for something.
Yeah, and there are some things I think where organisations can be going wrong and some sort of common traps, I suppose, and that's when we begin to treat succession planning as a sort of confidential strategy rather than a shared dialogue. And I've definitely experienced that in a previous organisation where I was part of an organisational redevelopment and restructures. And I remember going into a meeting where somebody was like, they had kind of mapped out, well, Joe Blogs can go over here and they can go here. And I was like, whoa, like, have we even had a conversation with these people yet about what they want? And it just seemed like people looked at me as if to say, well, why would we do that? I was like, we're setting ourselves up to fail here if we don't have that kind of conversation. So it shouldn't be a confidential strategy. You know, the conversation will help inform the strategy. So that's really important. And I think if we're avoiding honest conversations about ambition because we're worried about them, because we're worried about it creating expectation, then that adds in another layer of sort of a gap between what somebody's looking for and what you're conversating around in terms of their potential. And we don't want to be only talking about their next role when a vacancy appears, because that's just, timing is really poor when that happens. And, you know, and assuming that high performers are all of the high potential people, like we've said time and time again, Erica, haven't we, about actually there's the sort of forgotten layer of people often that are working super hard, but they just don't necessarily shout about it as much or aren't as in your face about it, but they could well be the high potentials. They're just not kind of aligned necessarily in the perfect spot for them at the moment. So, you know, those are some of the things to be thinking about when it comes to sort of traps, you know. And I think I suppose, uncomfortable truth is if someone's on your succession plan and they don't know about it, then it isn't a retention strategy because they don't know anything. It's just like part of your admin, isn't it, really? It's part of the layer, a bit of a layer of admin in the organisation, this plan that's hidden somewhere in a drive.
That's it. If they're not involved in it, then it counts for nothing, as some of our clients have found out to their cost, right? And, you know, so in summary, look, without a career conversation, your succession plans are just theoretical. They're not based in reality, and you can waste a lot of money and time on the wrong things for the wrong people who feel unheard and annoyed about it, even though you've put loads of effort into it. Your high potentials can get really restless because they don't feel like anybody is investing and attending to them. And, you know, the investment of time in a one-to-one conversation can be exponentially more useful to them and to you sometimes than a place on a formalized development program. It's also a much easier thing to gift. You know, you often have constraints on, you know, how many each year round can take part in a formal development program. And I think clients really underestimate the value of just quality time and a well-executed regular career conversation. And inevitably, your surprise resignations, the unpleasant surprises are going to increase because you haven't got any idea where you've got a red flag, where you've got a flight risk, where you've got people feeling like they've outgrown and are twiddling their thumbs. You know, you need to know this stuff. It shouldn't be a surprise. Just the same way that, you know, if you do performance conversations well, then the rating shouldn't be a surprise at the end of the year. It's the same that if you've done a career conversation well, then what happens in terms of people's career decision making, whether it's an internal mobility pivot or an external one, shouldn't be a surprise to you either. You should have known about that well in advance. And that's, again, also a huge advantage for succession planning. And, with having career conversations really being embedded into your people strategy, expectations are a heck of a lot clearer. People have a much more clear idea of what good looks like, what success looks like, where the developmental gaps are, and how it really helps to therefore make their development really intentional, because they can see where the gap is between where they are, where they want to be, and how it's going to be filled. So they become a lot more focused and intentional about that. And the movement feels like strategically and thoughtfully planned by the individual and by the business, not political, because in the absence of a kind of a high level of transparency around and meritocracy, people will start making things up that may or may not be true about how things happen within this organization, which won't necessarily work in your favor. And not everyone on a succession pathway is looking for a promotion tomorrow. I can be a high performer and really, really enjoy what I do and have no desire to move. I could be a high potential but have been stuck in something for ages and no one has flagged me, and I would love to go the distance. So they often just need that sense of stretch projects going that allow you to grow in role, around role, some visibility about what they're doing and doing well and getting quality feedback on the back of that. Perhaps some formal or informal mentoring that allows them to see the possibilities for where they could take their aptitudes and talents within what the business is currently focused on. And a bit more broader exposure, being seen and seeing what's going on within the organization. And these are all things that can be surfaced through a career conversation and often quite quickly actioned off the back of a career conversation. Because as we know, working for a lot of large organizations, momentum can be hard to come by. So the more that you can do things that are kind of discretionary and kind of speedy and kind of can do and actioned, the more I feel like, wow, I sort of mentioned that thing and something really happened on the back of it. And that kind of growth is actually very motivating to any individual.
And ultimately, succession planning answers the kind of who can step into this role. But the career conversation will answer, well, do they want to? And what's it going to take? And you need both. And so, succession lives in the sort of leadership meeting, but career conversation shouldn't just be part of annual review process. There needs to be an alignment between what the business needs, but importantly, what the individual wants and what it's going to take to fill the sort of gap if there is one. So definitely remember that.
So we love exploring these career-related questions, so please do keep sending them in. It's great fun to be answering them. And remember, they can cover organizational issues and concerns like we have today, or your own individual career decision-making. Or perhaps you are a coach or an internal mentor, a manager, and you want to get better at a specific element of career conversation. We're up for all of that, so please be generous and send in your thoughts and we will do our very best to answer them. You can get the link in the show notes, but you can also email us at pod@thecareerequation.com. Send us either a little voice note or just a short email telling us your first name, the kind of environment or institution that you work in, and what your question is. And we will do our very best to be useful, won't we, Zoe?
We will indeed.
And in the meantime, if you are keen to improve your career conversation skill sets, please do download our free guide to the 15-minute career conversation, where we set out the exact agenda that you need to follow, what the questions are that you want to ask and answer, and even give you the email that you should send in advance of time so everyone knows what they're doing, so you can immediately make use of the career equation in your business.